This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Sudan Military Council deputy leader meets Egyptian president as doctors say 5 protesters have been shot dead on Monday. The Somali government warns citizens against paying tax to armed groups. And we focus on why African migrants insist on making the dangerous Mediterranean crossing despite frequent tragedies at sea. Hello everyone, welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. We'll bring you the details on those stories in just a moment, but first, Penina Karibe with the day's business headlines. Penina.
Thank you, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Business, top negotiators from China and the United States to meet in Shanghai on Tuesday and Wednesday for continued trade talks. And a high court in Johannesburg approves a $360 million settlement for miners that contracted silicosis and tuberculosis. I'll have details of those stories in just a bit. For now, it's back to you, Beatrice.
Penina, thank you. And let's start off in Nigeria, where controversial leader Ibrahim el-Zakzaky of the Shiite group Islamic Movement of Nigeria will find out next week if he will be released from government custody. El-Zakzaky and his wife have been held since December 2015 on charges of homicide, unlawful assembly and disturbance of public peace. An August 5th bail ruling has been set in the northwestern state of Kaduna. CGTN's Deji Badmos reports.
This is what the whole area where the court is located looked like in the morning before the commencement of court sitting. The entire business district was shut down even to vehicular traffic, and security beefed up around the area for fear of any violence breaking out. Neither Mr. El-Zakzaky nor his wife showed up in court. Their lawyers told the presiding judge to grant both of them bail to travel out of the country for urgent medical treatment. But lawyers to the Kaduna state government opposed the application, insisting the medical treatment could be carried out here in Nigeria.
We attached not less than 8 medical reports from local and foreign doctors, all confirming their very, very dangerous state of health. The doctors are all united in emphasizing the need for them to seek urgent medical attention, medical treatment, which is not locally available.
With the medical experts from Barau Diko Teaching Hospital, from hospitals in Lagos, National Eye Center, and other hospitals in Abuja. There's a diagnostic medical center in Abuja that examined and stated that what the applicant needs is further observations and further clinical examinations to ascertain which type of treatment he will enjoy. But the medical experts who the applicants brought from abroad said that he can only receive adequate medical care in Dente Hospital, India.
It's now up to the judge to decide whether or not Mr. El-Zakzaky and his wife should travel abroad for medical treatment. Away from the court, reactions are trailing the decision of the government proscribing Mr. El-Zakzaky's Islamic Movement of Nigeria and designating it a terrorist organization.
It's something that was needless. The group has conducted itself in a peaceful manner. It has been on the receiving end of violence from government forces. The group is making a legitimate claim by requesting and demanding that its leader be released on bail to attend to his health.
If proscription is what the federal government can do to restore peace, to take those boys out of the street, why not? iPod was proscribed, and today we have relative peace. What is very important for this peace to last very long? Let El-Zakzaky be released.
The government decided to proscribe Mr. El-Zakzaky's group after a deadly protest last week in Abuja, in which at least 10 persons were killed, including a senior police officer and a trainee journalist working for a local TV station. The group's lawyer has condemned the proscription order, describing it as immoral and illegal. The group itself insists it will continue with the protest until Mr. El-Zakzaky and his wife are released. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
The Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi has been meeting the deputy head of Sudan's Transitional Military Council in Cairo. Egypt has been a strong backer of the ruling council, which has been governing Sudan since the ouster of former President Omar al-Bashir in April. General Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemeti, is seen as the most powerful figure on the council and is also head of the paramilitary Rapid Support Forces. His meeting with el-Sisi comes one day before talks are set to resume between the TMC and opposition leaders. On July the 17th, the two sides signed a power-sharing deal, and the negotiations on Tuesday are meant to iron out remaining issues. This breakthrough comes after months of stalled talks following a violent crackdown at a protester camp in Khartoum on June the 3rd. A joint probe by prosecutors and the TMC has revealed that security forces, including an RSF general, took part in the raid, but without orders from their superiors. Hemeti has consistently denied that his men were involved in the crackdown. On Sunday, scores of protesters took to the streets, this time demanding an independent probe into the June raid. Meanwhile, Sudanese activists say security forces have violently dispersed a student protest, killing at least 5. Wounded school children were being treated in hospital in the Sudanese city of El Obeid on Monday. The Sudanese Doctors Central Committee said that live ammunition was used against the secondary school students. The doctors group did not give details on what first started the protest, which took place around 400 kilometers southwest of the capital, Khartoum. There was also no immediate statement from state security services or from the ruling military council. Sudan has been rocked by mass anti-government protests since December last year. Demonstrations are still ongoing while ruling military council continues to negotiate a power-sharing agreement with the protest coalition. Well, let's cross over to CGTN's Adel Mahrouri. He's in Cairo for us. Adel, what more can you tell us, though, about the meeting between President el-Sisi and the Sudan TMC deputy leader?
Well, it's part of the Egyptian government approach in general in a move that is clearly directed by the leadership of the country here to bolster tie between the government and the Transitional Military Council. Since the beginning of this entire political transition and the ouster of President Omar al-Bashir, Cairo has been a very strong and vocal supporter to the Sudanese Military Transitional Council. President el-Sisi himself have previously welcomed Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, the head of the Military Transitional Council, and this meeting comes in the same direction, in lines to discuss bilateral relations, first as sort of a regular state visit between two officials, as the Military Council is so far the leading authority in Sudan. So the two countries have discussed bilateral relations, including railway and electricity connectivity between the two countries. That's beside, of course, the recent developments in Sudan. The meeting comes, as you've said, in quite a critical time. It comes where just casualties have been reported and clashes between protesters and security forces. So this is a time where the Military Council in general needs good support from Cairo, especially if it comes from the leadership.
Well, Adel, the meeting comes just hours before talks resume between the military ruling council and the protesting coalition. What would you say is President el-Sisi's place in all this?
President el-Sisi has a lot to give. First of all, he was in a similar position a few years back. He was the chief of military intelligence back in 2011 when Egypt went through a similar political transition. The military council, the Egyptian military council back then, was leading the country, and President el-Sisi himself was one of those who have been quite active in negotiations and talks with the Egyptian civilian powers. So there's a lot that the Egyptian president can give, and a lot of experience there that he can help in the entity that he supports the most. To Egypt, having a strong military and preserving the leadership of the Sudanese army is quite essential. As for Egypt, it is a sort of an assurance of the stability and the security within Sudan, which is quite crucial to Egypt. Egypt has been already suffering with the instability on its western border with Libya. Northeast there is Gaza, so it doesn't want, Cairo doesn't want an additional instability and volatile situation on one of its main borders, the southern part with Sudan. That's why it has been moving quite heavily to give support to the Military Transitional Council. It wants to maintain security and see a political process that goes through quite quickly. That's why President al-Sisi has been personally overlooking, along with the Egyptian intelligence, to give support and share information with the military council to maintain that this takes place in the soonest possible way.
Adel Mahroui for us there in Cairo. Thank you. Now, traders in Somalia have been warned against paying taxes to armed groups battling the Somali government. The Horn of Africa nation is struggling to contain an armed insurgency by Al-Shabaab, an ISIL that seeks to overthrow the government. From Mogadishu, here's CGTN's Abdulaziz Bilo with more.
An airstrike over the weekend killed an Islamic State operative in the Golis Mountains north of Mogadishu. The U.S. Army says that the fighter was critical to the group's operations. The strike is the latest in an attempt by Somali authorities to weaken Al-Shabaab and ISIL, two rival militant groups accused of causing havoc in a country emerging from years of civil war. For months, the two have clashed over financial resources, mainly extorted from big businesses. The country's traders have been forced to pay both rival factions or risk being targeted. Religious leaders say that it's against their religion to provide financial support to terror groups that in turn target innocent civilians and now want stern action taken against those found channeling funds to terror groups.
It's clear Al-Shabaab is committing human rights violations and we must speak against it. If we remain quiet, it means we support its atrocities. We have to address this issue and put an end to attacks against our people.
Al-Shabaab is using resources received from extortion to run its operations. The guns and bullets are bought by the taxes they collect. What is the difference between Al-Shabaab and people who fund their operations? There is no justification to support the killing of civilians.
Hussein Sheikh Ali is a former national security advisor to the Somali president and says authorities must eliminate both groups in order to provide a safe business environment.
Mogadishu has been a contestation place for many actors, both within the terror groups as well as the terror groups and the government and the AMISOM. So still is in the contested area. Shabab, on the contest between Shabab and Daesh, Shabab is been winning so far. Government should always watch Shabab and Daesh. The borders are very fluid, and you cannot know when one is getting more significant than the other one.
ISIL has targeted staff of major companies in a bid to get funding to support its operations. Unlike Al-Shabaab, the pro-Islamic State group is confined in the mountainous regions of Puntland, but is now making inroads in major Somali towns as it seeks to expand its support base. Big companies have been urged to invest in their own security as the government battles both armed groups. Last week, the country's president called on the Council of Ministers to come up with tough laws that will punish those found supporting terrorist groups. It remains unclear whether this new law will specifically target the country's business community. Abdulaziz Bilo, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Libyan rival militias are intensifying their attacks around the capital, Tripoli. The LNA forces have been trying to regain control over the strategic Gerian city, which GNA forces took control of a few weeks ago. While the international community's hands remain tied, the humanitarian situation is getting dire. CGTN's Adel Mahroui has the story.
The commander of the Libyan forces based in the East, Khalifa Haftar, instructs his fighters to enter Tripoli. The LNA and the UN-backed government in Tripoli have both been announcing achievements in their war against the other. On the ground, the fighting intensifies, but nothing has changed in territorial gains. With this new wave of civil war, many analysts believe hopes for political talks vanished.
It's almost impossible now to resort to negotiations. It's too late for a political solution. There's a clear and obvious war going on between militias, terrorists, extremist groups and the Libyan army. War is at its peak. Negotiations should be between legitimate representatives, people of reason. That is not the case now.
It's the strategic supply city for the LNA's Tripoli campaign. Meanwhile, the humanitarian situation worsens. This weekend, airstrikes on a hospital believed to be led by LNA have killed 5 doctors.
The humanitarian situation in Tripoli is catastrophic. Banks are running out of cash. The electricity power cuts are now lasting up to 14 hours. This is really affecting health conditions.
According to the World Health Organization, so far, at least 1,100 have been killed and 5,750 injured since the war over the Libyan capital began last April.
At least 100,000 Libyans have been displaced in this new wave of civil war, which appears to have had no progress for either sides, except in inflicting more casualties and threatening tens of thousands of Libyans every day. Adil Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
An Italian Coast Guard vessel stranded in the Mediterranean with at least 130 migrants aboard has been allowed to dock in the Sicilian port of Augusta, but Rome refuses to let them disembark until a deal is struck with the European Union. The migrants, who had set off from Libya in 2 rickety boats, were picked up by Italian patrols on Thursday night and transferred to the Coast Guard ship Bruno Gregoretti. The ship's crew is also blocked on board along with the migrants. Italy's far-right Interior Minister Matteo Salvini has reiterated that the migrants would not be able to leave the vessel until other European countries agree to take them in. Well, migration has become a common phenomenon in recent years. Only last week, another migrant tragedy occurred off the Libyan coast with about 150 people feared dead. Despite measures by European countries to stop migrants from making the dangerous trip across the Mediterranean, the crossings have continued. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes a look at the root causes and how Africa is dealing with the crisis.
It's the worst migrant tragedy in the Mediterranean this year. 150 men, women and children feared drowned after their boat capsized off the Libyan coast in the Mediterranean Sea last week. 137 others were rescued. So why do Africans continue to risk their lives to cross into Europe? Economic hardship is the main reason for migration, but attitude is also a key driver. In some countries, people with relatively good jobs, such as teachers, soldiers, and even government officials, have left. The high level of migration in some African countries is taking toll on their development prospects, leaving large gaps in the labor market and agricultural sectors. 36,000 migrants and refugees from Africa had traveled to Europe through the sea by July 24th this year, a 35% decrease from the 54,000 arriving during the same period in 2018. Deaths recorded on the 3 main Mediterranean sea routes in 2019 stand at 686 individuals, that is 45% of the 1,500 deaths in the same period last year. The African Union says only 20% of migrants actually leave the African continent. More people move from the Horn of Africa to Southern Africa than those crossing the Sahara to North Africa to reach Europe. To curb the crisis, the African Union has made refugees, returnees and internally displaced persons its focus this year. It has overhauled its 2006 policy to help states better understand why and how people migrate and how to manage it by treating immigration as an inevitability. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Nairobi, Kenya.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. African education ministers meet in South Africa as leaders ask institutions to align education with industry needs. And the Chinese government lays out its red lines while referring to the recent violent protests in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region.
Economic data out of the country. The country's foreign currency reserves.
With a dedicated and diverse team of anchors, CGTN now brings Africa to the palm of your hand.
I'm Penina Karibe in the heart of Nairobi, which is bustling
From everyday heroes to the continent's most powerful figures, we bring their voices to you.
We haven't changed. And this is something most of us are very excited about.
We bring you news that's changing perspectives.
Reporting from Nairobi City Center.
News that brings Africa to the world. CGTN. See the difference. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The Chinese government has laid out its red lines while referring to the recent violent protests in the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region. The demonstrations were held against a now suspended fugitive bill, which would have allowed criminal suspects in Hong Kong to be sent to the Chinese mainland. Wang Hui reports.
Group protests, demonstrations and violence have continued in Hong Kong for over a month. Yang Guang of the Hong Kong and Macau Affairs Office says the recent events have undermined Hong Kong's prosperity and stability and touched the bottom line of the one country, two systems principle.
三条底线不能触碰.
Yang stresses key stances of the central government. Beijing hopes Hong Kong people will oppose and boycott violence and firmly protect its rule of law. Yang further stresses that Hong Kong should end political wrangling as soon as possible and focus on developing the economy and improving people's livelihoods.
坚决支持.
The central government resolutely supports Chief Executive Carrie Lam as leader of the Special Administrative Region's government, implementing policy according to the law. It resolutely supports strict enforcement of the law by the Hong Kong police. It resolutely supports the punishment of lawbreakers by judicial departments according to the law and safeguarding the rule of law.
Yang discusses the importance of abiding by laws and investigating and dealing with those who break it, instead of resorting to violence.
任何主张
No matter how noble they think their goals might be, they cannot express themselves in an illegal or violent manner. Violence is violence, and illegal behavior is illegal behavior. The nature of that will not be changed by making false propositions.
Yang says the central government will continue to unswervingly implement the principle of one country, two systems, and ensure that this principle remains unchanged and it's not tampered with in practice.
一国是根是本.
The one country is the roots. The roots need to be deep for the leaves to flourish. When we implement this in Hong Kong and Macau, we emphasize three bottom lines. We absolutely do not allow damage to national security and national sovereignty. We absolutely do not allow challenges to the authority of the central government and Hong Kong's basic law. And we absolutely do not allow the use of Hong Kong to infiltrate and damage the mainland. We can talk about the two systems only on the basis of one country.
Yang adds that Hong Kong is China's Hong Kong, so this is China's domestic affairs. It won't allow foreign countries' intervention. Some countries want to turn Hong Kong into China's problem, but China intends to prevent that. Yang says the most important task for Hong Kong now is to firmly punish violent crimes, recover the safety of society, and maintain its good rule of law. Wang Hui, CGTN, Beijing.
British Prime Minister Boris Johnson says he will sit down for Brexit talks only if the EU shifts position on the divorce deal. A spokesperson for Johnson said he has been reiterating to European leaders that the withdrawal agreement has been turned down 3 times by Parliament and therefore it needs to change. He has also warned that Britain will leave without an agreement if the European Union does not change its position. Since becoming Prime Minister last week, Johnson has spoken to several EU leaders but has not announced when he will make his first visit abroad. Well, the UK has repeated its demand that Iran must release a British-flagged vessel detained by the Islamic Republic near the Strait of Hormuz, the world's most important waterway for oil shipments.
And continue to
make the case to the Iranians as they are trying to increase their acceptance amongst the international community that they've got to respect international law. And the ship you're talking about was illegally detained, and we are going to be expressing and engaging with the Iranian authorities to make clear that we expect the vessel and the crew to be released.
That was Dominic Raab rejecting the idea that Britain could release an Iranian tanker it seized in Gibraltar earlier this month in exchange for the detained vessel. Meanwhile, Iran's Revolutionary Guards published footage showing them warning off a British warship during their July 19 seizure of the Stena Impero. The tanker was seized after British forces captured an Iranian oil tanker near Gibraltar, accusing it of violating European Union sanctions on Syria. The Association for the Development of Education in Africa's annual Policy Dialogue Forum took place in Johannesburg. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa was among the attendees. In his speech, he noted African economies are unable to absorb a significant proportion of young people due to the education system not aligning to the market's needs. CGTN's Jelisa Njamela has more.
The African continent has a large population of young people. Young people in this vast continent constitute about a fifth of all people under 25 years in the world. This, according to President Cyril Ramaphosa, is a great advantage for Africa, considering that most developed countries are aging. However, on the other hand, he believes that African economies are unable to absorb a significant proportion of these young people. And this is mainly because the education system is not aligned to the needs of the economy.
Among other things, this is due to the mismatch of the skills people learn and the needs of the market. With the advent of the fourth industrial revolution, there is danger that this mismatch will just continue to grow. Due to the skills deficit, our countries are ill-prepared for the technological change that beckons. We therefore need to change the direction of secondary school education if we are to develop relevant skills for the new type of economy.
This annual Policy Dialogue Forum is deliberating on solutions to this predicament. 26 countries from across the continent that are affiliates of the Association for the Development of Education in Africa are represented here. The African Union is also part of these deliberations.
At the African Union Commission, we believe that quality education is the ultimate key to inclusive prosperity and sustainable development and achieving the vision of the African Union of an integrated, peaceful, prosperous Africa, driven by its own competent and empowered citizens.
This forum is particularly concerned that young people who completed secondary or tertiary education are increasingly finding it difficult to secure employment. They're advocating for consideration of change to education systems on the continent.
If we are talking of change, that change must begin with us. If we are not able to change ourselves, let's mobilize the people that can help us to change the systems.
The Education Forum is also making a call to all education ministries in Africa to use the youth demographic dividend to develop education systems that are capable, accessible, and focused. President Ramaphosa says the outcomes of the forum will serve as an impetus for the fortunes of young Africans and therefore for society at large. Jelisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Well, let's now go to Penina Karibe for a look at the day's business news. Penina.
Thank you, Beatrice. And coming up on Africa Live Business, top negotiators from China and the United States to meet in Shanghai on Tuesday and Wednesday for continued trade talks. And a high court in Johannesburg approves a $360 million settlement for miners that contracted silicosis and tuberculosis.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Top negotiators from China and the United States will meet in Shanghai on Tuesday and Wednesday to continue with trade talks. This will be the first time they are meeting since President Xi Jinping and his U.S. counterpart Donald Trump agreed in June to resume economic and trade consultations. Experts say both sides are working to ensure a new round of productive talks. CGTN's Huna explains.
The meeting scheduled this week will be the first face-to-face discussions between the two sides since their top leaders met at the G20 summit in Japan last month. Analysts said that holding the talks in Shanghai, the country's financial hub, will enable the U.S. to better understand China's determination to open up further. Previously, the trade talks in China took place in Beijing.
The recent Chinese purchase of U.S. agricultural products sends a positive signal and paves the way for trade talks in Shanghai.
According to China's Development and Reform Commission and the Ministry of Commerce on Sunday, several million tons of soybeans have already been loaded and will soon be on their way to China. Meanwhile, the U.S. has already exempted extra duties on 110 items of industrial products from China. Earlier this month, some Chinese enterprises have consulted with U.S. suppliers over the prices of cotton, pork, and sorghum. Agreements have been reached on some products and also on the exemptions of extra duties on U.S. imports.
There is huge demand in Chinese agricultural products market. Our import is growing year by year. The U.S. side can only benefit by cooperating with China.
Experts say that Chinese enterprises will continue to purchase U.S. agricultural products in accordance with its needs. And sources from both ministries said the new deals on imports of U.S. agricultural products will be reached as long as prices are reasonable and the products of good quality. China hopes that the U.S. can come up with more concrete measures to ensure a good atmosphere and positive outcome for the trade talks. Hona, CGTN, Beijing.
The full bench of a high court in Johannesburg has approved a $360 million settlement of the silicosis and tuberculosis class action suit. It involved several gold mining companies and thousands of ex-miners operating in South Africa. Companies involved include African Rainbow Minerals, Anglo-American South Africa, Anglo Gold Ashanti, Goldfields, Harmony and Sibanye Stillwater. CGTN's Angelo Coppola has more.
The silicosis and TB class action case took 8 years to get to this stage.
It's regrettable that it has taken so long, but at the same time, we are very, very pleased that we've managed to come to a settlement as opposed to being locked into litigation for the next 10 to 15 years.
With so many parties and their legal teams involved, the process was remarkably fast in comparison to what could have dragged on for decades.
I mean, now and again, you almost thought, wow, this is a crisis. We're not going to get this thing done. But I think collaboration, participation, compromise, probably the big issues.
The settling companies have created a trust that will administer the initial $360 million fund and distribute payments to the qualifying ex-miners.
We've also made it an absolute point to get government on board right, at the outset. And the importance of that is simply because this is a trust that's going to have its reach not only within South Africa but also beyond the borders of South Africa. And of course there we would need the cooperation of government.
With a fund pool of this size, there will be vultures circulating, looking to take advantage.
So there are many thousands of people which are due compensation, and there's going to be lots of people vying for that money. And so it's going to be keeping it clean, keeping it honest, keeping the charlatans away from the people who are due that money.
At the start of the settlement process, there were 32 companies involved, which comprised between 8 and 9 groups. 2 of those have opted out of the process and are appealing the agreement. That's DRD Gold and ERPM. Meanwhile, Randgold has opted to not follow that appeal process.
Will certainly be our view to engage with, the non-settling companies, the 3, to come to a resolution. But to the extent that we are not successful, we will certainly pursue the claims against them.
It's been a long road to get to the settlement, and now the really hard work starts in identifying those miners in the surrounding countries around South Africa, and they need to be coming forward to get that compensation that they're entitled to. I'm Angelo Coppola for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Nigeria has backed its commitment to join the Africa Continental Free Trade Area by setting up a committee to implement the agreement. The country is promising new laws where necessary to enact membership of the pact. The deal was operationalized earlier in the month in Nigeria's capital, Niamey, launching a $3.4 trillion economic bloc. Nigeria had been reluctant to join as it sought to ensure it would not open local industries to dumping from countries outside the region. Its signature was seen as an important endorsement, as it is the largest economy on the continent. Thousands of young entrepreneurs from across the continent met in the Nigerian capital Abuja for the 5th edition of the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Forum. It is designed as a summit for African startups to engage with policymakers, mentors and receive seed grants. Elumelu is championing entrepreneurship across Africa and has committed $100 million to grow African startups and young businesses over a 10-year period. CGTN's Deji Badmas reports.
Launched in 2014, the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Program aims to identify, train, mentor and fund 10,000 African entrepreneurs over a 10-year period who it believes could go on to create at least 1 million new jobs and generate around $10 billion in new business revenue. The foundation has so far invested $25 million on 7,520 entrepreneurs.
I came to Abuja, Nigeria, to be able to learn from the other presidents who are going to come on board, other speakers who are going to come on board, other global business leaders and all that. To be able to take the knowledge, the experience, the expertise back to Ghana and be able to implement all that into my business.
I'm here to meet other African entrepreneurs, network and do business.
Right in this hall is where the young entrepreneurs interface directly with the policymakers and business leaders.
The young African entrepreneurs, the stage is now yours to take and actualize your dreams and aspirations. What we do at the Tony Elumelu Foundation is just to create this kind of platform for all of you, give you the opportunity to interact with our leaders and give you little seed capital to help you prove your ideas so that people, our young ones, don't go to the grave with their ideas.
And just as in the previous 4 editions, the foundation lined up a number of African leaders and policymakers to interact with the young entrepreneurs and share their experiences on some subjects.
Development is something we must do. Prosperity is something we must achieve. So how do we get there? We have to create that vision of how we move forward. It starts with the people. If you have knowledge, if you have invested in skills, if you are investing in infrastructure, what do you do with that? What follows is really business. It's doing business. It's entrepreneurship. It's people's creativity and innovation that has to be put into play. At the same time, that would not happen unless and until you invest in a conducive, good governance environment that will allow what needs to happen to take place.
I'm glad that a number of African governments are represented here. We're challenged to create the enabling environment for all of these young entrepreneurs to thrive. And the promise of entrepreneurship banks, the promises that we've made about establishing entrepreneurship banks must be kept.
The young people are not liabilities, they are assets. And when you go into a bank as a young person, you enter right there, nobody sees assets. Everybody sees risk, risk, and risk. Well, As president of African Development Bank, this is the point I want to make, is that we must begin to put our capital at risk for the young people of Africa. What I want to propose today is this, that it's time for African leaders, African governments, to begin to shift from youth empowerment to youth investment.
It's been quite a rewarding period for the young entrepreneurs gathered here. In all, 3,050 of them got seed funding of $5,000 each to develop and scale their enterprises. Of that number, 2,050 were actually sponsored by the African Development Bank and the United Nations Development Program UNDP. They would continue to receive mentorship as they go on to achieve their dreams. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Abuja, Nigeria.
Egypt's state-owned airline EgyptAir has received a first-of-its-kind plane that uses biofuel. The airline took delivery of a Boeing 737-9 Dreamliner reputed for low-carbon emissions. Yasser came with the details.
It's the fifth out of 6 Dreamliners that Egypt has purchased from the Seattle-based producer. This Boeing 787-9 is seen as the ultimate luxury.
It was 20% more efficient in fuel consumption. The body made of composite material. This will be a very great added value to EgyptAir because it's a very important, up-to-date, modern aircraft that has so many facilities to accommodate the passengers, very good entertainment in the interior, and it's very economic.
The Dreamliners, along with another 18 new planes, are meant to keep EgyptAir on par with its competitors in Africa.
Up to the past 2 years, EgyptAir was running in losses due to several problems. Of course, one of them is the devaluation of the Egyptian pounds and the political situation at that time and so on. The very tough competitor for EgyptAir in Africa is the Ethiopian Airlines. Ethiopian Airlines started in cooperation with TWA, and after that it went alone. Ethiopian Airlines are flying to almost 80 to 85 countries in Africa, and they are making very good use of the treaty of the free skies that has been signed lately this year for Africa. And I think EgyptAir should do the same.
EgyptAir has also been upgrading its client services and other aspects of operations.
The upgrade in the EgyptAir fleet does not only serve the company's developmental efforts, but it will also have an impact on the tourism industry in the country, which will benefit from such a development.
Tourism inflow had increased from 8 million to 13 million tourists a year in the last 3 years. Experts say the state-owned airlines has had a hand in this improvement.
We had a problem in that there were not enough planes that can go long distances to Australia, US, Canada, Latin America and the Far East, for instance, without having to make several stops. But the new planes can travel long distances directly, making it easier and faster to bring more tourists. It also helps in opening new markets and destinations unavailable before, such as the African market, which we are now targeting.
The Egyptian airliner says the 6th and final Boeing 787 should be received by the end of the year. That's Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
And that's it for now. But later on Global Business, emission standards threatening salt factories in South Africa. We'll have the details live from Johannesburg at the top of the hour. I shall see you then. For now, it's back to you, Beatrice.
Penina, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. A Polish artist adorns Egyptian cave church with biblical art. Stay with us.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Ntah, an anchor for CGTN.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes. The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Let's head over to Egypt, where a man initially from Poland has spent decades earning a living by adorning caves in monasteries with biblical work. Let's take a look.
51-year-old Mario has spent more than 2 decades carving the rugged insides of the 7 cave churches and the chapels of the monastery with designs inspired by biblical stories. The Polish artist says he initially arrived in Egypt on an educational mission, looking for an opportunity to serve God at the monastery.
I never thought I would be talented, and it's not something I planned. It was not even related to my studies or my job. I believe that God gifted me with this talent for sculpture. I was so young when I started. I was 18. I wanted to do something that would bring me closer to God.
Mario says his journey was not easy in the beginning. He has practiced sculpting for more than 23 years and completed about 70 sculptures that have added to the monastery's allure by giving it an ancient look. He says he sculpts biblical figures to fulfill the wishes of the monastery's parish priest, whom he met in the early 1990s in Cairo.
Our message is to let people understand that we are not sculpting statues to be worshipped. We are telling the history through biblical art. It's like an artistic language, just like the pharaohs when they used to tell stories through their drawings.
Over the years, Mario has become known to everyone in the monastery and the thousands of people living in the city. He has mastered the Arabic language and developed a particularly strong command of the Egyptian dialect. Despite marrying an Egyptian woman and siring 2 daughters with her, Mario is still not an Egyptian citizen, as the law in the country does not allow him to obtain permanent residency. Nonetheless, he does not see himself settling anywhere else other than Egypt. Jean Keo, CGTN.
In Jordan, some unique attractions have been added to the seabed near the city of Aqaba to create the country's first underwater military museum. To promote greater tourism, the city hopes that these structures will attract more diving enthusiasts. The museum is expected to relieve pressure on nearby natural coral reefs and in time become a location where marine life can flourish. A total of 19 military vehicles and machines have been submerged after weeks of planning to ensure that the process would not harm the natural ecosystems in the area.
As soon as they hear, especially Aqaba residents, they're going to grab their masks and come to see the beautiful views. Now, after a short period of time, this will be filled with colorful fish. There's a tank out there that looks beautiful. We often go to see it. Also, there's a helicopter that they lowered. It looks great. It looks like a military plane. My dad, my sister and I are going to go in and watch it.
Marine biodiversity in this area is relatively small. There aren't many coral reefs and they're not varied. Placing these military vehicles in this location will allow coral reefs, corals as well as marine life, including fish, to find a safe sanctuary enabling them to live and procreate in. Also, corals will grow on these military pieces. We predict that in about a year or so, we will see a beautiful sight.
This is a great initiative. It will attract more tourists to the area. We currently have 23 diving sites, including the plane they submerged around a year and a half ago. There is also a tank. And this is a new location and it will bring more work for Aqaba.
And here's a rather unique story for you. An Indian man has bitten a snake to death after the reptile bit him first. Raj Kumar from Uttar Pradesh was drinking alcohol in his home when a rat snake entered the house and bit him. According to his father, the man chewed it to pieces as an act of revenge. Kumar was taken to hospital and his condition was reported by local media to be critical. Meanwhile, the snake has been taken away by local residents and cremated.
This is definitely weird. I have seen people come in with snake bites, but never somebody who bit a snake and then brought it with him in a bag.
A snake bit him, so in turn, he bit the snake also and chewed it into pieces.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Africa's low-ranked football teams paired ahead of the 2022 World Cup qualifiers.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout,